Okay. All right. Well, hello, if anybody's actually made it. I'm happy to be back again for 2 nights now on my productivity streaming goals. We will see. Hey, man. How are you doing? I would love to hang out. Let me know when works for you. Message me where you're at these days, because they are empty. We're moving, so I'm working on getting everything boxed up. I've got about 30 boxes in this room, heading on to a new place. Finally got a house, so we are working on some reno in my new office. Gonna build in these shelves, take them over there, and it's gonna look real sweet when we're done. I got some sick furniture. I'm excited. It is the coolest stuff. So so we moved, just local move. So we bought a house. So same town, same area of town, but we've been renting for a couple of years. And so, okay, an hour and a half. Okay. Oh, that's not bad at all. Well, yes, we should. Oh yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. It's a scary, complicated, expensive time, but we're having a great time. So so we're getting some stuff worked out there at the house, making sure that there's no asbestos, but that's a whole separate thing. But yeah, getting a new office ready, getting all the books over there. So I'm doing a lot of digital stuff here. Yes, Ian, it has been a while. It's been so long since I've seen you all. It's good to have you. Good to have all two of you. And okay, I did make Ian a mod. Josh, I am just gonna make you a mod too. Don't feel like you have to do anything, but I can just do that because why not? Yeah. So since you weren't here yesterday, Riddle. Oh hey Ethan, how's it going, man? Oh yeah, big yawns. So if you weren't here yesterday, what I'm doing is I'm working on building a syllabus for a course on the political thought of the American founding. I've done that as a full semester course before. This is going to be a summer intensive class. So do you want to be a mod too, Ethan? You can be a mod. You just popped up. Here you go. Look, everybody's a mod. There we go. All my viewers are mods. Wow, Origin. Wow. No, Aristotle, a virtue that he missed on his list was humility. But that's a Christian virtue that you could learn from. Anyway, so for those who are here, those who aren't, I'm building a syllabus for this 1 week intensive course on the political thought of the American founding. As part of that, everybody who's in here right now are people that I know and trust, so they're the people I would want to mod for me anyway. If we pick up any new people, then you can, exercise rule with an iron fist. So I'm going through right now and adding titles of works to this syllabus that currently now has page numbers to a textbook I likely will not be able to use going forward because it's an out-of-print textbook, or when you get it, it's print on demand, and it's awful. And so I'm writing down the titles so that I can find public domain versions of those to save in a sort of PDF reader. That's the goal. And as part of that, we're going through some of those works. I'll raise my volume. I will raise my volume, but everybody else let me know if that's just an Origin problem, because I don't want to be clipping on y'all. I'm going into the high yellow and a little into the red on my OBS. So if my volume's good for y'all, then Origin, fix your volume. If it's quiet for everybody, then I will fix it. So we're reading a few of the documents at various lengths, as much as we can squeeze in. Fine for you. Well, Origin, it sounds like you just all right. It sounds like you just suck, Origin. So I think that you should do better. I think that maybe it's a balancing issue. If you have a Windows PC, you might have your browser window balanced lower, but I don't want to. I'm going to trust. I mean, I believe you that it's quiet for you, but I'm going to trust my my interface in my OBS, and I don't want to start clipping. So if I do start clipping, people let me know. I'll boost it just a hair, and then you guys can turn me down. Last time we were effectively looking at the imperial crisis period, and so that period runs, we generally mark it from 1760 to 1776, and so these are debates around taxation and representation, and what does representation mean, and who gets to tax the colonists. And we are at the point so far in our journey, at a sort of high level of resolution, or 30,000 foot view. The colonists have argued, hey, these new taxes you're trying to implement for to raise revenue, these are improper because we are not represented. Our colonial legislatures are the proper bodies to tax us. They're our actual representatives. They can tax us, and we will send money to England through that mechanism. But this other mechanism that you're attempting to use as a revenue raiser is illegitimate. And so we've made it that far. And the last thing that we looked at last time was a pamphlet by James Otis in response to this reforms of custom service speech that happened over in England. This claim that, the colonists, they were fine with external taxes. They were fine with taxes on things coming in and going out of the colonies, on regulation of trade, which is a kind of external taxation. But what they're really worried about is internal taxation. Okay, fine. The English say, we won't do these internal taxes like the Stamp Act. We will instead just regulate trade through like sugar and tea, or the stamp, etc. So, sorry, not the James Otis pamphlet. The last thing we read were the Dickinson letters. I'm getting my names confused. You can see they're very similar. Would be very easy. Not at all. I just I goofed there. So let me make sure. I think that I have this all set up. Nope. Okay, so that is sourcing to the wrong. Oh, no, it is. Okay. Boom. Perfect. Okay, I think I have things mostly set up to where you guys should be able to see things. But what I'm going to have to do... that's perfect. There we go. I wanted to make it so that my OBS... There we go. Okay, so I want to be able to make sure I can see on my OBS what you guys are seeing on my screen, so I'm not reading from something you can't see. Okay, so we made it through the Dickinson letters here. We read a bit of those on taxation. If there's anything that you guys have questions about and want me to rant about, I'm happy to. You can slow me down at any point. Half of the purpose of this is for me to get the document names written down on paper, so I can build that PDF reader. Half of the purpose is for me to refresh on them myself, so having to explain them now saves me some review later. So this Morgan Chapter 5, that's from the Edmund Morgan, Birth of the American Republic. It's working! It's working! The Birth of the American Republic volume, highly recommend it. Very short, but very good, especially if you're looking for just a kind of like quick and dirty history alongside these documents. That's the kind of thing you're looking for, is to something like Morgan's introduction. Edmund Morgan and Herbert Storing, two of the greatest historians of the American founding, at least of their era. I'm sure there are great ones working today who might outpace them, but at least in terms of people who've had many decades of reflection to test their mettle, Morgan and Storing are excellent. What would Hamilton think about what? About streaming? About what? I need some context here, Riddle. So yeah, that Morgan Chapter 5 that's that Edmund Morgan book. The kids that I have this summer are not going to be reading that, but I recommend it to you all. Next we have Jefferson's Summary View of the Rights of British America. So I'm going to head down there because that's a little bit of a ways down in this document. We need non-mods in here. Well, you guys can always invite them if you have friends who you think might enjoy hanging out in stream like this. Send them my way. About the taxation question, Hamilton in these early periods is very young. I don't know when actually he makes it to the colonies. I should have that date in my head, but I don't. So he's involved in some of the later controversies, but I don't have any material that I assign from him in the imperial crisis period, which makes me think he's either not there yet or he's just not yet influential. But I also could be just missing that. I'm not a wow, both of you make the same joke. Riddle and Ethan are simpatico here of the same mind. But Hamilton, I think, would have shared the same view as almost every other revolutionary, which was that Parliament has no right to tax the colonists because they are not and cannot be represented. Again, I apologize for the quality of this PDF document. It's a completely legal one, by the way, obtained through completely legal means for the purposes of this revision. So, okay, I have summary rights view. Okay, so that's good. I have that title there. So this is a really important text here in 1774. We've jumped a few years, you may notice, because the things we were reading last time were late 1760s. Now we've jumped to 1774, so we're a little bit... we're playing a little fast and loose with the history in some ways, because it's not a history class. The point is to understand the political arguments being made. And at this point in the syllabus, you can see here, week 4, I have it titled Jefferson Accuses King and Parliament, and then I have Adams on the supremacy of the colonial legislatures. And the turn I'm making here is those earlier documents. You may remember, if you were here yesterday, the two of you who were, the Dickinson letters. One of the things he says, maybe a little bit ironically, but let's pretend sincerely, at the end of the letters is, hey, we are... like any other subjects of the crown, we are part of the English Empire. We are not making any arguments that we couldn't make from anywhere else from that perspective. We are claiming our rights as Englishmen. We are doing it in all due deference to the crown. We're not accusing the crown of doing anything evil. Even Parliament, maybe they're just being misled by bad advisors, you know? Maybe they're just screwing up and they don't realize it. So like, we're not saying anything crazy or radical. But if these earnest petitions through legitimate mechanisms don't work, Dickinson says, hey, you know, who knows what'll happen, right? This turn that I'm highlighting here through Jefferson's summary view of the rights of British America, it's a big turn. I'm not a historian of this period, so I'm not going to make the strong claim that no one before Jefferson makes these claims. But Jefferson is at least one of the first people who starts speaking in language that says, hey guys, maybe Parliament actually doesn't have our best wishes in mind. And we've said that for, by this point, 1774, by this point, at least 10 years, people have been saying, screw these Parliament guys, they're trying to tax us. Jefferson is at least one of the first who comes along and says, and you know what? It's been going on so long that we got to start blaming the king too. He's either impotent and feckless, or he's complicit and evil. And so we got to start blaming him as well. So that's one of the reasons this is such a cool document. So I'm going to try my best to read this, given the state of the text. It's pretty bad, though. So resolved that it be an instruction to the said deputies when assembled in General Congress with the deputies from the other states of British America to propose to the said Congress that an humble and dutiful address be presented to His Majesty, begging leave to lay before him as Chief Magistrate of the British Empire the united complaints of His Majesty's subjects in America, complaints which are excited by many unwarrantable encroachments and usurpations attempted to be made by the legislation of one part of the empire upon those rights which God and the laws have given equally and independently to all. So here's Jefferson laying a petition to say, hey, let us speak with one voice to the king, petition the king this one last time, and say, hey, the Parliament, which in this language is sovereign over one part of the empire, is attempting to violate the rights of another part of the empire. And one thing that we'll see in Adams' letters, which I want to read a little bit of, that's why I pulled up this this PDF, Political Writings of John Adams, as well. You think of Duffy Diggs with the dreads. Yeah. The Jefferson guy in Hamilton is probably the best rapper of the bunch. He's great. One of the claims that's being made here by Jefferson and then by Adams in his Navonglis letters is that at worst, or maybe at best, the colonies ought to be treated like other British or other kingdoms that are in the British Empire. So Adams is going to appeal to Scotland, for example. So Scotland still today has its own parliament, right? It's kind of perfunctory. The union between Scotland and England is pretty complete by this point. There's not a whole lot of functional sovereignty that goes on in the Scottish Parliament, other than over some pretty strict local matters. But at this point, especially in the late 1700s, Scotland is relatively independent, though it is under the kingdom of the British or English monarchy. And so Adams and Jefferson both are going to be making an argument that the state of the colonies is pretty similar, that basically this is a sovereign kingdom under the crown, but that Parliament, in that case, the English Parliament doesn't make laws for Scotland. They kind of do now, but because of that complicated. In the same way, Adams is going to argue and Jefferson is going to argue here, the legislature of the colonies should be treated as the sovereign. Okay. To represent to His Majesty that these states have often individually made humble application to his imperial throne to obtain through its intervention some redress of their injured rights, to none of which has ever even an answer condescended. Humbly to hope that this their joint address, penned in the language of truth and divested of those expressions of servility which would persuade His Majesty that we are asking favors and not rights, shall obtain from His Majesty a more respectful acceptance. In other words, he says, before this, our petitions have been kind of like in a beggarly tone, like, oh, please, sir, don't do the thing that you can definitely do, but we just don't want you to. No, now Jefferson is saying we're firmly asserting our God-given and legal rights both. This is important to all of the people at this point, that they're asserting not just the rights of Englishmen, but the rights of men that obtain in any sort of government or even prior to government. Okay. And this His Majesty will think we have reason to expect when he reflects that he is no more than the chief officer of the people, appointed by the laws and circumscribed with definitive powers to assist in working the great machine of government erected for their use, and consequently subject to their superintendence. That is a pretty huge claim, right? It wasn't too long ago, that is in the era of Locke and just before, that people were making the argument that the kings ruled by divine right. And if you hear people talk about divine right monarchy, usually they don't kind of really know what they're talking about. You could use divine right monarchy to refer to all systems that claim any sort of divine legitimacy for rule, but that would be a mistake here, because everybody involved in this conversation, at least, would on paper say they believe governments are instituted by God and in some derivative sense get their authority from God. The difference between that and divine right monarchy, as Locke is responding to it in his first treatise that nobody reads, is that the divine right monarchists think literally genetically the King of England has his political authority because of his lineal descent from Adam and the donation of authority that goes along with that through that line. Here, Jefferson is saying the authority of even the king is subject to the superintendence of the people, not just the people as represented in Parliament, but the people in all parts of the British Empire. And in order that these our rights, as well as the invasions of them, may be laid more fully before His Majesty, to take a view of them from the origin and first settlement of these countries, to remind him that our ancestors, before their emigration to America, were the free inhabitants of the British dominions in Europe, and possessed a right which nature has given to all men of departing from the country in which chance, not choice, has placed them, of going in quest of new habitations, and of these establishing new societies under such laws and regulations, and of these as to them shall seem most likely to promote their public happiness. Hello, silly guy. 69. Yes, it is. Whoa, that's a lot of words. Yeah, I need that as a reaction in here. I need a stream deck where I can just hit a button that says, "Whoa, that's a lot of words." And yeah, that's a good comment. I appreciate that. This part about the right which nature has given to all men of departing from the country in which chance, not choice, has placed them, it goes to the idea of free passage or freedom of exit that is developed by Locke than by other people, and certainly Locke is not unique. I'm going to say that a lot. Like, there are a lot of ideas that our founders get at least partially from Locke, but it's a mistake to think they come always from Locke, or sometimes even primarily from Locke. But this idea that my subjection to the political authority over me, it can be legitimate on the basis of tacit consent. And so what Locke says tacit consent is, well, I've just continued hanging around. And so by not leaving, I've kind of consented to the laws over me. There are other forms, he says, of explicit consent, like voting, for example, an act of a citizen. But the authority that a government has over you, just by sort of accident, it can be legitimate because of tacit consent, but it's only legitimate in the sense that, hey, you have a right to leave if you want. And so Jefferson is claiming this right. He says, hey, look, you have here in the American colonies a bunch of people who, whether they were subject to the king's dominion in England or its territories, or whether they were citizens of Europe, some of them were Frenchies and some of them were Germans even. It's pretty crazy. Franklin famously didn't like all the Germans that were coming to the colonies at this point. But wherever they came from, they voluntarily left the place they were before and came to the American colonies. That was a natural right that they asserted in that movement, is what Jefferson is suggesting. And establishing new societies under such laws and regulations as shall seem most likely to promote public happiness. In the case of the American colonies, what seemed most likely to them to promote the public happiness? It was establishing, in some cases, private charter colonies. So in the case of Pennsylvania, right, it's William Penn and his family who get the charter for this land that they run as a kind of corporation. Or in some cases, crown colonies, like Virginia and New Jersey. I think Virginia's one. Virginia? No, maybe Virginia's not. No, Virginia's private. New Jersey for sure. Massachusetts. I'd have to go look at the list of which are crown colonies and which are private. But in both cases, right, these are people coming and saying, look, here's how we want to live. We want to live across an ocean from that king. We want to live where we have our own local legislature. We want to live where we get to vote on most things. What about sovereign citizenship? Is there a claim that they explicitly disconsent and they think that overrules tacit consent? I think their argument is that they've never explicitly consented, and so no force or authority over them that they have not consented to is legitimate. And so their argument is I think they'd say they never even tacitly consented, but I'm not sure. I don't follow a lot of sovereign citizen gobbledygook. Anyway, okay. That their Saxon ancestors had, under this universal law, in like manner, left their native wilds and woods in the north of Europe, and then, oh my gosh, had possessed themselves of the island of Britain. Gosh, the scan of this is terrible. Then less charged with inhabitants, and had established there that system of laws which has so long been the glory and protection of that country, right? So the colonists are just doing the same thing that the Saxons did so long ago in settling in England, in the English Isles. Nor was ever any claim of superiority or dependence asserted over them by that mother country from which they had migrated. And were such a claim made, it is believed that His Majesty's subjects in Great Britain have too firm a feeling of the rights derived to them from their ancestors to bow down to the sovereignty of their state before such visionary pretensions. In other words, Jefferson is making a very strong claim, and I'll just say, like, maybe not a historically defensible one, that in coming to the American colonies, those people who settled there agreed to be subject to the crown, part of the kingdom, but not subject to the absolute authority of Parliament, not subject to its ability to tax them, for example. And so I want to speed up a little bit because there's a lot here. And let me see, actually, 227 to 238. Yeah. So we have him speaking on free trade, and the arguments are beginning at this point that in passing these restrictions on what the English are calling at this point external taxation, that these two are an arbitrary act of control over their freedom of trade. There's a section. So he lists the acts that we've been talking about already. If we had time to read all of this in full, it would be great. I would love to do just like a recording of all of my lectures. That might be something I'll pursue. Here we go. So in respect to the acts in question, some of which have been repealed, some of which have been lately instituted, all of that, outside of parliamentary AoE. Exactly, right? There's a range of AoE damage for parliament. That's a terrible analogy, but I'll run with it, actually. Yeah, it's probably a terrible analogy because it implies it's just force, and I don't want to just keep talking about force doctrine, but what would be the analogy to legitimacy in video game language? I'm not sure. I'll think about this. The king has a bigger AoE that reaches across the Atlantic. All right, you know what? I'm gonna develop that. I'm gonna think on that. I'm gonna see if that sticks. I'm gonna think about this one. Okay. All right. That these are acts of power, assumed by a body of men foreign to our constitutions, plural, and unacknowledged by our laws,
against which we do, on behalf of the inhabitants of British America, enter this our solemn and determined protest. And we do earnestly entreat his majesty, as yet the only mediatory power between the several states of the British Empire, to recommend to his Parliament of Great Britain the total revocation of these acts, which, however nugatory they may be, may yet prove the cause of further discontents and jealousies among us. So that claim there, right, that it is the king who is the mediator between the different parts of the kingdom. So the colonies are on level with Scotland, or on level with whatever. I please don't ask me the extent of the British Empire at this point in history. I'm not a historian, never claimed to be. So basically that the colonies are on level with any of those, especially with Scotland, is the comparison that Adams is going to make. That we next proceed to consider the conduct of His Majesty. And this is where I ask students to stop. Which, by the way, if we get to the Declaration today, I will do a lot of this stopping thing. I'm writing an essay on the way that I teach the Declaration, not just out of arrogance, because I think I do it really well, but I was asked to write an essay on the Declaration for the 250th anniversary. And I do this thing that I don't think it's innovative, particularly. I know other people do it, but I do what I call like disruptive reading, where obviously it's good to have students read aloud in class to make sure they're awake and paying attention. But I like to have students start reading the Declaration, and I'll call on somebody, or somebody volunteers, and they're like, all right, start right from the beginning. And they usually skip over the unanimous declaration part. And I say, no, start right from the beginning. So they read a unanimous declaration of the blah, blah, blah. And then they go to the beginning, and we hold these truths to be self-evident. And I say, stop! Right off the bat, stop. What does that mean? And we talk about this idea of something being self-evident and what that could possibly mean. And I give them some examples, etc., and then have them go on again. And I stop them at a bunch of uncomfortable places. And it's really fun watching the class reactions, because they start to get uncomfortable at first, and then they start laughing. But then they realize this preamble part of the text is actually very densely packed with a lot of particular claims, some of which are laid out here in this summary view of Jefferson, because he copies them into the draft of the Declaration. But some of which are, coming from Locke or from Montesquieu or older ancient thinkers, but they're all really important claims, right? The idea that there was previously a union between one people and another people, that the English people and the American people are a different people, and now the ties that bind are separated. Okay, we're making an assertion. Don't ask questions. Don't think I've ever read a single U.S. historical document from start to finish or incompleteness. That is sad to me, not because it's your fault, but because somebody should have made you at some point. So I'll make you. Maybe we'll read the whole Declaration today. Well, I don't think we'll get that far, but well, how long have I been? I don't know. We'll figure it out. 30 minutes. My goal is to go for like 2 hours when I do this, at least, until I build up more stamina. Hour and a half. We might get to the Declaration. We'll see. Let's see. Is there something else I wanted to say? I feel like I was going somewhere with that rant. Anyways, I stop students here at this paragraph, because this is where Jefferson turns from material that's sort of repetitive of things that we get in other documents around this period, and gets to what I consider the really radical part of this that indicates the mood is shifting. And obviously it's 1774, right before the violence that breaks out in 1775, right before the Declaration of 1776. So we are leading towards the blow up, right? So things are changing. But this marks a change in rhetoric coming from the colonies, at least in their public-facing writing. You'll find letters before this where people are making some pretty radical claims. Actually, interestingly enough, it's people like Franklin who realize sooner than everyone else does that the claims the colonists made back in the 1760s are pushing them towards independence. There's a lot of people in the 1760s who are still convinced, oh, no, guys, we can hold this principle that Parliament has no legislative authority over us and everything will be fine. And Franklin in the late 1760s is realizing, I know where this is headed. So interesting. He's one of the prescient ones of the founders. I did read parts and had a citation when I answered an essay question for GS. There you go. It's awesome. Okay, so this is where the rhetoric shifts, or it's where you can mark the rhetoric shifting if you want an intellectual point to plant a flag. It's nice to have those to hang your hat on, right? Like building a timeline when you're a kid and like middle school history. It's kind of like that. So here, think of this as the vibe shift, as the kids say. That we next proceed to consider the conduct of His Majesty as holding the executive powers of the laws of these states, and mark out his deviations from the line of duty. Whoa. Mark out his deviations from... Now we're accusing the king of something very particular. By the Constitution of Great Britain, as well as of the several American states, His Majesty possesses the power of refusing to pass into law any bill which has already passed the other two branches of legislature. His Majesty, however, and his ancestors, conscious of the impropriety of opposing their single opinion to the united wisdom of the two houses of Parliament, while their proceedings were unbiased by interested principles, for several ages past have modestly declined the exercise of this power in that part of his empire called Great Britain. So, the English monarch, like the American president, has a veto power. He can refuse his assent to laws. But Jefferson is saying for some time, at least over Great Britain, the monarch has refused to exercise that power. He's withheld that part of his power. Well, by change of circumstances, other principles than those of justice simply have obtained an influence on their determinations. The addition of new states to the British Empire has produced an addition of new and sometimes opposite interests, and that issue of interest relating to representation, right? Who actually represents my interests, not just like what I'm interested in, but literally what is best for me, what is actually in my interest in the grand scheme. It is now, therefore, the great office of His Majesty to resume the exercise of his negative power, and to prevent the passage of laws by any one legislature of the empire which might bear injuriously on the rights and interest of another. Now, this is interesting. I want you to, if you're keeping track, if you're taking notes, if you care about this at all, I want you to flag that sentence in your head. Because here we have Jefferson. Again, this is his summary view of the rights of British Americans. Jefferson, in his summary view, asks the monarch to resume exercising the power of the veto. When we come to the Declaration, if we get there tonight or not, I don't know. It's representing your interest in shonen anime. I can guarantee you there is at least one congressperson who has a legislative assistant who is keeping them apprised of anime-related happenings. So I can almost guarantee you that. I can't actually guarantee you, but I can basically guarantee it. Jefferson is asking King George to resume using the veto, to veto these acts of Parliament that are against the interests of the colonists. But when we get to the Declaration, we're going to see that one of the grievances raised, or a couple of the grievances raised actually, have to do with the king refusing his assent to laws passed by the American legislatures. One of those that Jefferson mentions in the first draft of the Declaration is that Virginia, among other colonies, had passed anti-slavery laws that had been effectively pocket vetoed by the monarch. They'd been passed by the Virginia House of Burgesses, or whatever they call it. They use weird words in Virginia. And the king had just not signed it into law. And so one of the complaints that Jefferson makes in his early draft of the Declaration is that the king has unjustly exercised his veto power by vetoing a law that was actually in the interest of the colony that passed it. Here he's asking, I'm trying to, I guess, get ahead of the accusation that it's hypocritical. Here he's asking the king to use his veto power in the cases where justice demands it, where interest has skewed the actions of the legislative body, so they're no longer legislating in the interest of the people they purport to represent. Well, yeah, okay, he mentions slavery. Dang it. I'm getting ahead of myself, where Jefferson, as usual, says the better thing here, right? Yet this will not excuse the wanton exercise of this power, which we have seen His Majesty practice on the laws of the American legislatures. Dang it, I'm getting ahead of myself. I didn't even have to go to the Declaration. I just had to keep reading. Yes, the ref is playing for the away team, right? For the most trifling of reasons, and sometimes for no conceivable reason at all, His Majesty has rejected laws of the most salutary tendency. The abolition of domestic slavery is the great object of desire in those colonies where it was unhappily introduced in their infant state. But previous to the enfranchisement of the slaves we have, it is necessary to exclude all further importations from Africa. Yet our repeated attempts to effect this by prohibitions and by imposing duties which might amount to prohibitions have been hitherto defeated by His Majesty's negative, that is the veto. Man, I forgot. I should have just kept reading. It's been a while since I've reread this. This is why I'm doing this. This is great. I'm receiving an education in real time. But again, I'll emphasize, I'm not just conflating the two. This is a thing that Jefferson re-raises just a couple of years later in his first draft of the Declaration. It's ultimately removed from the Declaration, because Franklin wisely counseled Adams that the Declaration would not get the signature of states like South Carolina if it included that explicit anti-slavery provision. Now, whether or not he should have kept it in for justice sake, that's an argument I think you could fairly make. But Franklin was probably right that there was no way you were going to have a united 13 colonies signing onto the document if that portion had remained in there. Nevertheless, Jefferson gets to state it here. Okay. Nay, the single interposition of an interested individual against a law was scarcely ever known to fail of success, though in the opposite scale were placed the interests of a whole country. That this is so shameful an abuse of power trusted with his majesty for other purposes, as if not reformed would call for some legal restrictions. I don't often actually... We don't spend a lot of time talking about the veto power when I do con law, because it hasn't been super relevant or questioned for most of its use in history. But I'm probably gonna have to do some pretty deep dives on the history and use of the pardon power here soon to more effectively teach that, because, well, it's become more controversial of late. But so here Jefferson says, well, maybe we need some legal restrictions on that power if it's going to be used so unjustly. So here again, he says, with equal inattention to the necessities of his people, here has his majesty permitted our laws to lie neglected in England for many years, neither confirming them by his assent nor annulling them by his negative. So that's why I mean by it's an effective pocket veto. So that such of them as have no suspending clause we hold on the most precarious of all tenures. His majesty's will, and such of them as suspend themselves till his majesty's assent be obtained, we have feared might be called into existence at some future and distant period, when time and change of circumstances shall have rendered them destructive to his people here. I'm going to get to... Here we go. So he mentions that the royal majesty, the king, the monarch of Great Britain, has retained the power to dissolve Parliament. That's something that Locke mentions as well, right? You need somebody who has the power to call the Parliament into existence so that it can do its legislative job, and then say when they're done, because you can't have, Locke says, a perpetual legislative body always in session, or you just have tyranny. And so you have to have somebody whose job it is to say, here it's starting and here it's done. And so the king has the power to dissolve Parliament, has used it in various ways throughout the centuries. But Jefferson says, your majesty or your governors have carried this power beyond every limit known or provided for by the laws. After dissolving one House of Representatives, they have refused to call another. So this is what happened in Massachusetts. The House of Massachusetts is dissolved and never recalled, or as Jefferson complains in the Declaration, is sometimes called in a place that's inconvenient to the actual legislators. And I want to get to... Oh, no. Why is that? It's so annoying that it's... hold on. Oh, man. This PDF is terrible. Just terrible. Just terrible. Okay. I want to get to the end here of the claims on the monarchy, because... Yes, okay. That these are our grievances, which we have thus laid before his majesty, with that freedom of language and sentiment which becomes a free people, claiming their rights as derived from the laws of nature, not as the gift of their chief magistrate. Let those flatter who fear it is not an American art. To give praise which is not due might be well from the venal, but would ill beseem those who are asserting the rights of human nature. They know and will therefore say that the kings are the servants, not the proprietors of the people. Open your breast, sire, to liberal and expanded thought. Let not the name of George III be a blot in the page of history. You are surrounded by British counselors, but remember that they are parties, or in the language that we pick up from the Federalist later, you might say they're factions, they're factious interests. You have no ministers for American affairs, because you have none taken from among us, nor amenable to the laws on which they are to give you advice. It behooves you therefore to think and to act for yourself and your people. The great principles of right and wrong are legible to every reader. To pursue them requires not the aid of many counselors. The whole art of government consists in the art of being honest. Machiavelli would have some words for Jefferson on this point. Only aim to do your duty, and mankind will give you credit where you fail. No longer persevere in sacrificing the rights of one part of the empire to the inordinate desires of another, but deal out all equal and impartial right. Let no act be passed by any one legislature which may infringe the rights and liberties of another. This is the important post in which fortune has placed you, holding the balance of a great, if a well-poised empire. This, sire, is the advice of your great American Council, on the observance of which may perhaps depend your felicity and future fame, and the preservation of that harmony which alone can continue both to Great Britain and America the reciprocal advantages of their connection. It is neither our wish nor our interest to separate from her. We are willing on our part to sacrifice everything which reason can ask to the restoration of that tranquility for which all must wish. On their part, let them be ready to establish union and a generous plan. Let them name their terms, but let them be just. Accept of every commercial preference it is in our power to give for such things as we can raise for their use or they make for ours. But let them not think to exclude us from going to other markets to dispose of those commodities which they cannot use, or to supply those wants which they cannot supply. That's, and it's an economic metaphor that's both literal and figurative, right? He's saying, we have goods that we can provide you. We have a good relationship of exchange with the home country. And let's keep doing that. But don't tell us that we can't trade with other people when it benefits us, and don't tell us that we can't go with other people who can benefit us more than you. In other words, there's an implied threat in the background of, like, not just we're going to go carry on commerce with other people, but hey, if you're not going to do your job and treat us justly as a member of your empire, other people might be willing to take us on. So still less let it be proposed that our properties within our own territories shall be taxed or regulated by any power on earth but our own. The God who gave us life gave us liberty at the same time. The hand of force may destroy but cannot disjoin them. This, sire, is our determined resolution, that you will be pleased to interpose with that efficacy which your earnest endeavors may ensure, to procure the redress of our great grievances, to quiet the minds of your subjects in British America against any apprehensions of future encroachment, to establish fraternal love and harmony through the whole empire, and that these may continue to the latest ages of time, is the fervent prayer of all British America. But that point in the document where perhaps the French, oui, oui, monsieur. Oui, oui, baguette. Sorry. Oh, man. That point in the document where he swaps from talking almost purely about Parliament to talking almost purely about the king is pretty radical. It just is. Like it's the first sort of extended treatment of its time in this era in a public document that sort of dares to say, hey, the king has been screwing up this whole time too. Guys, it's not just Parliament, right? It's not just Parliament passing laws we don't like. It's not just Parliament taxing without representation. It's not that. There's more to it than that. Okay, I'm going to try to move this over as far as I can. Trying to balance these documents has been really hard to make sure that my text is fully on the screen. Also, I don't think my alerts are working, because last time I did get a couple of YouTube subs during the stream, and they're supposed to trigger the alerts. I need to check what's going on with that. I linked the account to Streamlabs, but all my settings are different because the Twitch, I don't know, it was a whole mess. So I'm gonna make sure I fix that. Okay, I love that one. That one's fun. All right, we are gonna move over to Adams for a little bit. This is just to refresh myself on the selections here. You'll notice, by the way, in the thumbnail for this stream that I made my face into a transparent PNG file and put it over the face of John Adams in that famous portrait of the signing of the Declaration. I put it over John Adams, not Jefferson, because one, Adams is better than Jefferson, and two, Adams was a grumpy old man and a portly fellow, and so I resemble him much more than I resemble Jefferson. But I also just enjoy the writings of Adams as well. So I'm going to jump to these Novanglus letters here in this text. Really, really great text that I usually assign in this class.
Okay, good. The spacing is pretty good on this for you guys. So there's some history here of the Novonglis letters that he sent, and they were published in the Boston Gazette Weekly till the 19th of April, 1775. By the way, when you're reading these sorts of documents, I mean, it's kind of trite to like talk about how, oh, they were all smarter than us or whatever. Like it's we could argue about it, but do you remember when you read like these letters, or when you read the Federalist Papers, these are basically glorified letters to the editor. Now it's true, like any other time, there was a large illiterate population in the colonies, but as I mentioned last time, at least male adult literacy was perhaps the highest in the world it had ever been at that point, pushing at least 80%, maybe more. And even the rougher sorts who worked in trades that were not considered particularly honorable, the craftspeople, printers, funny enough, were pretty low on the totem pole of manual labor professions, despite Franklin's rise to fame. Even those people were mostly literate and would have been reading and engaging in these sorts of debates. And it is kind of embarrassing to realize the difference in quality of our public conversation. Now, there are lots of other examples that would make you go, whoa, that's pretty crazy what they did back then, right? All the stuff that you can hear about in Hamilton, like the whole Reynolds pamphlet, the partisan journalism, and the kind of like ridiculous things that are getting published, the kinds of things that lead to the publishing or the ratification rather of the Alien and Sedition Acts, the Sedition Acts. Like, I'm not defending them. I would never defend them. It's the worst thing Adams did, and if he hadn't done it, maybe people would think better of him. But when you look at the kind of stuff that was being published in newspapers prior to the Sedition Act, you kind of be like, I mean, I wish some other people who follow various internet drama were here to appreciate this joke, but like, I mean, descriptively, it kind of makes sense why they might pass the Sedition Acts with the kind of stuff that was going on. Like, I don't support it. I wish they hadn't, but you can kind of understand why they would with the sort of stuff that was being published. Dude, how you doing, man? Thanks for stopping by. Good to see you. Good to see all my old homies in the chat. All the homies from John's stream and house and such. Good to see you. Yeah, so anyways, as we read this, just remember, this was published in a newspaper with a pretty wide circulation, and be embarrassed that we don't really do this anymore. Okay, I'm not starting from the beginning, because what we have here is a letter that Adams is responding to. So there's a guy who's publishing under the pseudonym, I guess you would pronounce that Massachusettensis. It's terrible. I've tried to. I've taught this I don't know how many times now, and every time I'm like, okay, I'm going to say it right this time. Massachusetts, Massachusetts, whatever. Anyways, so this is the letter that Adams is responding to, and if you want to read it, you can. It's important historic context, but what we really care about is the meat of it, which is going to be Adams. And so we're going to jump ahead, not to the first response letter here. We're jumping ahead to page 38, which is Novonglis, March 6th, 1775. So let's read a little bit of this. Oh no. He's going to give me Latin right off the bat that I'm not going to be able to translate on the fly, because my Latin's terrible. I love this. Now, again, I just said that, but there is some spiciness, some sass. Our rhetorical magician in his paper of January the 9th continues to wheedle. You want nothing but to know the true state of facts to rectify whatever is amiss. He becomes an advocate for the poor of Boston, is for making great allowance for the Whigs. The Whigs are too valuable a part of the community to lose. He would not draw down the vengeance of Great Britain. He shall become an advocate for the leading Whigs, etc. It is in vain for us to inquire after the sincerity or consistency of all this. It is agreeable to the precept of Horace, and I'm going to, hang on, let me look at this for 5 seconds, and then I'm going to Google it. No, I'm not even going to try. I don't want to embarrass myself. I think I've got like 2 words of it, but it's from Horace. Let's see. Where are we at? Epistles of Horace. If anybody in the chat has good Latin, let me know. There's one Latin to English website that is actually pretty good. I think it's Poly Translators. Yes. Okay. So it irritates, it soothes, it fills with false terrors, and then that last part. Magus. There we go. It irritates, it soothes, it fills with false terrors like a sorcerer. Okay, that makes sense. Ian, you should have Scott here for me so he could do this for me. This, by the way, is the other thing that you should realize is that people in this period are casually just writing in Latin and Greek and expecting their audience to be able to read it because they've been to Latin schools. Okay, so it irritates, it soothes, it fills with false terrors like a sorcerer. So the letter that he's responding to, he says, it makes all these promises like, oh no, I'm sympathetic to your concerns and don't worry, I'll help you guys out. And we just wouldn't want to make Britain mad, and we just care about the poor of Boston. That's all he desires. You can sense the sarcasm. After a long discourse, which has nothing in it but what has been answered already, he comes to a great subject indeed, the British Constitution, and undertakes to prove that the authority of Parliament extends to the colonies. Why will this writer state the question fairly? The Whigs allow that from the necessity of a case not provided for by common law, and to supply a defect in the British dominions, which there undoubtedly is if they are to be governed only by that law, America has all along consented, still consents, and ever will consent, that Parliament, being the most powerful legislature in the Dominion, should regulate the trade of the dominions. This is founding the authority of Parliament to regulate our trade upon compact and consent of the colonies, not upon any principle of common or statute law, not upon any original principle of the English Constitution, not upon the principle that Parliament is the supreme and sovereign legislature over them in all cases whatsoever. The question is not, therefore, whether the authority of Parliament extends to the colonies in any case, for it's admitted by the Whigs that it does in that of commerce, but whether it extends in all cases. And so the Whigs in this case are just those who are supporting, moving away from Parliament, not yet openly calling for independence, at least most of them, the Tories being those siding with England. And we are then detained with a long account of the three simple forms of government. That is Aristotle's three simple forms of government, democracy, a polity, an aristocracy, and a monarchy. And we are told that the British Constitution, consisting of kings, lords, and commons, is formed upon the principles of monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy. Should be polity, because democracy is the translation for the bad form of simple government, but whatever, in due proportion, that it includes the principal excellences and excludes the principal defects of the other kinds of government, the most perfect system that the wisdom of ages has produced, and Englishmen glory in being subject to it and protected by it. Then we are told that the colonies are a part of the British Empire, but what are we to understand by this? Some of the colonies, most of them indeed, were settled before the Kingdom of Great Britain was brought into existence. The Union of England and Scotland was made and established by an Act of Parliament in the reign of Queen Anne, and it was this union and statute which erected the Kingdom of Great Britain. The colonies were settled long before, in the reigns of the Jameses and Charleses. What authority over them had Scotland? Scotland, England, and the colonies were all under one king before that. The two crowns of England and Scotland united on the head of James I and continued united on that of Charles I when our first charter was granted. Our charter being granted by him who was king of both nations to our ancestors, most of whom were post-nati, born after the union of the two crowns, and consequently, as was adjudged in Calvin's case, free natural subjects of Scotland as well as England, had not the king as good a right to have governed the colonies by his Scottish as by his English parliament, and to have granted our charters under the seal of Scotland as well as that of England? So, again, the argument being made here is that whatever relationship the colonies have is based not on the relationship of Parliament and the colonies, but on the relation, which at this point, again, is based on the union of Scotland and England in the Kingdom of Great Britain, is based on the union of subjection to the crown.
And so that is the ancient constitution that Adams says has not changed. I'm going to go on a little bit. There is a section that I am hunting for that is really important that I want to read for this, because I do want to move on to a couple things. Yeah, I do want to do the declarations, and that'll probably take about an hour. Sure. Okay. Going on to 52 here. Here we go. So, here's a principle that a representation in Parliament is impracticable, we all agree, but the consequence is that we must have a representation in our supreme legislatures here. The legislatures of the colonies are the supreme authority, the supreme legislative authority. The legislative authority is the political authority. It's the power to make laws with punishments up to and including death, is what Locke says. And so the claim is that who gets to make those laws with punishments up to and including death? It's the supreme authority in whatever governmental system exists. It's the people through their representatives in the legislature. The legislature, which one? Parliament or ours? Ours. Has to be ours. That's the only possible rational answer to this. Okay, so we conclude there on 52. I give them a snippet from another one, 59 through 70. There's a section that I want to make sure I don't miss, and I'm Yeah, so the writer he's arguing against argues that the colonies are annexed to the realm and subject to the authority of Parliament. And Adams says, that's the first time I've ever heard that claim. We deny it. It's just, that's not the case. Nobody's been making this argument before, so don't pull out a new one. It's sort of like in a debate, like, where'd that argument come from? Whoa, what happened there? Thanks for ruining my scan, whoever did that. Okay, yes, this is it. This is what I wanted. Okay. Adams lays out the history of law on the question of subjection to the crown. On the question of, can the colonies be subject to the crown but not subject to Parliament? And he says, based on his study of the history of law, especially the feudal law, he says a person or country might be subject to a king, a feudal sovereign, in three several ways. First, it might be subject to his person. And in this case, it would continue so subject, let him be where he would, in his dominions or without. To his crown, and in this case, subjection was due to whatsoever person or family wore that crown and would follow it, whatever revolutions it underwent. And third, to his crown and the realm of state, and in this case, it was incorporated as one body with the principal kingdom, and if that was bound by Parliament, Diet, or court, so was the other. It's humbly conceived that the subjection of the colonies by compact and law is of the second sort. That is, its subjection to the crown, not to the whole of the kingdom, not to all of its parts, not to the courts and parliaments over in England, but to the crown, and then to the courts and parliaments established in the colonies. So he's presenting here, even as late as 1775, this argument that the colonies can be held in union with the crown, not subject to Parliament. It's becoming increasingly clear, of course, by 1775 and the beginning of the violent part of the Revolution, though there was skirmishy violence before, that if he's right in principle, he's at least wrong in practice. We're not gonna see the union persist. But I end with this before we turn to the Declaration, because that's an interesting question. Jersey and Guernsey. I just want to make sure that sorry, I'm okay. Yeah, that question of what can the colonies continue to be subject to the crown but not subject to Parliament? Practically speaking, right? In principle, Adams argues they can. Practically speaking, can they? And the answer, it turns out, eventually is no. After Lexington conquered, it becomes clear that this is going nowhere but independence for the colonies, whatever happens after that. And so the Continental Congress begins to argue about the prospect of independence and how it can be accomplished, commissions Jefferson to write the draft. He edits it with the help of Adams and Franklin and others, submits it to the Continental Congress. It is heavily debated and ultimately signed and passed. And so I guess we'll do it. I guess what we're going to do now is move over to the Declaration for a little bit. There's a couple different websites that have versions that are readable. Bill of Rights Institute is a good one. I'm just trying to find the one that's most pleasing to the eye if I'm going to have it on screen, you know. National Archives is pretty good. Yeah, let's do National Archives. That's good. Responsive text. All right, that's good. I like it. We'll do National Archives. We'll do... Let me do... Yeah, perfect. And then... So we're gonna mute you and mute you. And then we are gonna throw you up there. Boom. We will move you just a little bit. Boom. There we go. Okay. Got space. Okay, so we're going to move to the Declaration of Independence for a while, and if this seems pedantic to you, I'm sorry. It's important. If, like Riddle in the chat, you've never read an American founding document front to back in one sitting, you should. It's well worth it. It's very important. And it's important for a variety of reasons that we're going to be talking about this year and, you know, into July and the rest of the year. Obviously, all the documents that we've been reading the past 2 nights, or skimming, we're not reading, you know, this is very quick and dirty stuff. This isn't all the content. But the documents we've been looking at so far play into the history of this. The claims that it's making are obviously made in a kind of political cadence, right? They're claims that are being made with an eye towards unity between the colonies, which, by the way, are quite diverse, right? So you have colonies that have quite different religious views. The difference between different Protestant sects may seem minimal to us today, all things considered, or may seem minimal to you if you're a Catholic or an Orthodox person, but was wildly important. Look behind my monitor. There's a treasure map. Where? Behind where? Which behind my monitor? This is scary, Ian. I don't know what you're trying to... Oh, I get it. Oh, I'm sorry. It took me a second. I haven't... National treasure. I'm sorry. I'm slow. I'm real slow tonight. You got me. You got me good. That was a good one. Sorry. You guys throw me off. This is great. Okay, I need a moment to recover. I was supposed to do this with a straight face. So it's a document that's written for political purposes, right? It's a declaration to the world, but also a document that unites the colonies, though they differ in many matters. Almost didn't happen. The debates were contentious and really difficult. You can see a dramatized form of them with many of the quotes that we have recorded from the proceedings of that in the John Adams miniseries from HBO. Well worth your time. Highly, highly recommend it. But it is something that expresses called a condensation of well, we'll have to talk about that, Ian. I believe you when you say that. I just finished reading a book that conflated the not just in terms of like, well, they're both not Orthodox, but said that Presbyterians, Calvinists, and Puritans, that whole lump of people, are included in the Radical Reformation, so that just stunned me. I was like, no. We have this distinction between the Magisterial Reformation and the Radical Reformation for a reason. Maybe we could have some arguments about certain Puritans, I guess. But anyways, yeah, so that's still on the brain. But no, I believe you that most of you
Most of you don't do that. Yeah, I'm still kind of annoyed by that, actually. Anyway, so yeah, turns out the even the Puritans didn't teach the great apostasy in the way that the radical reformers did. Okay, anyway, well, it's not a separate issue, actually. It becomes very relevant for the last third of this course that I teach on religion. It provides a condensation. Yes, yeah, thank you. I'm glad you have the same immediate intuition as me and weren't just like, wait, are you sure they aren't? Like, I'm glad. Phew. Yeah, I was a bit stunned. Anyway, there's a condensation of a political philosophy that motivates a diverse set of men. Some of the people signing this document are deists. They're Unitarians, heretics of all sorts. Probably even an atheist among them. I don't know which one, but there are present Quakers and Puritans and Presbyterians, a couple Catholics, and so on. Actually, I think there's 2 Catholics on the Declaration, maybe more on the Constitution, or maybe it's 1 on each. I should have those numbers in my head, but I don't. Anyway. It unites diverse people religiously, unites diverse people in terms of culture. And so the North and the South at this point are already split along lines of economic interest. And it does so very effectively. And so it should be read, I think, in that context, but also as a kind of grand statement of a political philosophy. All those things can be true. So I want to do what I do with my students and walk you through a little bit of what I call the sort of disruptive reading of this, like taking each small chunk and the claims that it's making and trying to understand what it's actually saying, to like let the text actually hit you the way that it should. So even if you are somebody who reads this all the time and you have it memorized, right? A lot of people have the preamble memorized, and that's great. You should, I think, slow down and break each of these chunks up to see the extent of the claims. So I want to do a little bit of that now. I'm not going to do it as dramatically as I do in my class to save both my voice and your ears. But if you want to disrupt me in the chat and ask any questions, please do. So, okay, so we have, the Unanimous Declaration of the 13 United States of America. States is capitalized. United is not in the original document. That's a point of contention for some people who like to emphasize the sovereignty of the states in the early part of the Republic. I would fight with them about some of those claims, but here we go, right? When in the course of human events it becomes necessary. Whoa, stop is where I would tell my students to stop. That's a crazy claim. What does necessary mean? I asked them to define it, and most of them like kind of look at me like I'm crazy at first because they aren't often asked to just like straight up define words. And it's actually hard if somebody puts you on the spot when you're not expecting it to like, well, necessary. What do you mean by that? Define it for me. And if you have them pull out the dictionary or we dicker about it for a little bit, they'll say eventually get to, well, it's a precondition for something, as like a logical operator, a necessary condition is required before something can happen. That's one sense of it, but it's also something that is, absolutely demanded. It's required. It must happen given the sequence of events that have preceded it. And so that's an interesting claim, right? Right off the bat, we're getting the claim that whatever follows in this document, and whatever this document does, which we know from the title and from the history, is declaring the independence of the United States. It's being claimed to be necessary in some sense. If you've been with me in my class so far, you know by now that not everybody thought it was necessary for the union between the mother country and the colonies to split. They thought it was perfectly tenable. So we're going to have to see some evidence that this has become necessary, that something made it necessary. And that's what this document exists for, is to try to prove to people, as we're going to see, to a sort of watching world, why it is supposedly necessary. It's giving Michael Scott. I'm just going to let that one stand. All right, so when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another. And then I tell my students, stop! Okay, tell me what claim is being made here. And of course, the claim is that there are, in this equation, 2 distinct people groups. We didn't say it. We declared it. Yes, a geometric sense. Geometric is going to be important for the
self-evident line that we're about to get to. So keep that in mind. That's, I think, as always, Ian, a very astute observation. Yes, a kind of geometric necessity of relationship, right? Like the conditions or relationship between these two things have become such that whatever follows. But this claim here, for one people on earth to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, now we have a claim that there are two distinct people groups. We are no longer saying we are just claiming our rights of Englishmen. That's what you see mostly through the 1760s. We're Englishmen. Give us our English rights. Treat us like other Englishmen. We should be represented like Englishmen, etc., etc. Now we have the claim, here's a people group, there's a people group. Previously, they were bound by political bands, not bands of religion or even ethnicity, or political bands connected them. And now, what's going to happen? They're going to be dissolved. So it has become necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them. Whoa, stop! I make them do again, because it's very fun to disrupt them so often. And you can imagine, obviously, that there's discussion attending each of these points and some debate or what have you. Although it's hard to get students to have opinions these days. That's my least favorite thing about the past couple of years of teaching, or few years of teaching, is students are just pretty demure at this point. They just sort of like let whatever's happening in the lecture wash over them, and I don't know, they don't really talk a lot. It's kind of weird. Okay, but to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitled them. So here we have a claim of justification, right? So it's become necessary to do this. The Gen Z stare, exactly. It's become necessary to dissolve these political bonds. There are two distinct people groups that previously were bound together politically, and now it's necessary to dissolve those bonds, and as a consequence to assume something that we are entitled to. Here's our justification. The laws of nature and of nature's God entitle us to assume a separate but equal station. Now, again, this is primarily Lockean. It's not just Locke, but it's primarily Lockean in Jefferson's imagination. And this is the claim that by nature, any given person and any other given person are free and equal with respect to each other. What does he mean by equal? He's very clear. Like, he doesn't think everybody is equal in stature and skill and everything. And it's not even for Locke. Like, we'd like to say, well, equal before the law. Well, kind of. Equal before the law of nature and nature's God, maybe. Locke likes to say a lot, the law of nature, which is reason, teaches any who will but consult it that, and then tell you something that he thinks is obvious from the law of nature. But it sure does seem like there are a heck of a lot of people who will not but consult the laws of nature if the laws of nature are so obvious. Anyway, strictly speaking, with respect to the laws of nature, any given person and any other person are equal with respect to each other in the sense that neither of them has authority over the other to command the other one to do anything. And that each of them has a right to their own self-preservation and self-defense and all of the other things that follow logically from the original property that each has in his body. That's sort of how Locke describes it. And so that's true of groups of people as well, right? Locke says, okay, so you can leave the state of nature by consenting to, it's a preamble that allows you to assert whatever you like, whatever you want, like it's a conclusion. Maybe. I might want to contend with that in a little bit, but I don't want to lose my thought. Hang on, I'm going to finish this. So for Locke, what obtains between two people in the state of nature also obtains between two groups of people who themselves are outside of the state of nature with respect to their people group. And what that means is Locke says any group of people capable of making a majority can agree by unanimous consent to leave the state of nature by subjecting themselves to, or sorry, now I'm using Locke or Hobbes language, by agreeing to establish a government that will do the things that they want by nature better than they can in the state of nature. When they do that, they all become equal before the law that's created by the government that society creates. So we unanimously agree to create a society. The society votes on what kind of government we want by majority consent, and that government then makes the laws that we're all subject to. But my group of people over here, and this group of people over here, we all leave the state of nature together. we don't have any relationship to each other. We're free and equal with respect to each other. And so Locke says, are there any people today who still live in the state of nature? He says, yeah, the princes of different nations are in the state of nature with respect to each other. They don't have any common power that keeps them in awe, and so they are free and equal with respect to each other. That's the claim Jefferson is making here. When we've split that political band, the American people and the English people, we're the same, at least, before God and the laws of nature. And so when this happens, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. And so I asked them to explain that as well, and especially asked them to tell me why they think that's there. Because Jefferson, or the whole of the Continental Congress at this point, is making a claim that what is happening is necessary and it's justified. So it's not just necessary, but a necessary evil. No, it's necessary and justifiable. It's going to happen, and it's on the basis of the law of nature, and nature's God. But even though it's always going to happen, and even though it's justified, look, we have a respect for the opinions of mankind. Decent respect for the opinions of mankind. We're not justifying ourselves. We're not asking your permission. We're not asking you to give us a thumbs up. We're just going to tell you why we think this is necessary and why we think it's justified. So that's, I just think, a kind of important point. A preamble that allows you to assert whatever you want like it's a conclusion. That may be true. But maybe I'd lean more heavily on that decent respect part, which is going to say, okay, you're claiming that this is necessary and justified, and you're going to do it no matter what I say. Fine. I'm real curious how you're going to back that up. And that's, I think, what the rest of the document exists for. So we've got the preamble here. We're going to get the preliminary remarks next that are going to give us the actual political theory. And then we're going to get the grievances that led us to this point. And then we're going to get the conclusion that sort of says, now what? Speaking of Locke's thing about reason, is there more to that? I'll wait for it if there is. Okay. My use of preamble was probably confounding. I'm confounded, that's for sure. Okay. So I have them begin to read again. Right again. So I'm telling you how this goes in my classroom. It's very fun. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Stop. What the heck could that possibly mean? What does it mean for something to be self-evident? And we don't even know yet what he's saying is self-evident, right? He says, we hold these truths, plural, to be self-evident. And I say, well, don't even tell me what the truths are yet. Explain to me this concept of self-evident. And so the most common answers that come up immediately, obviously, are like, well, it's obvious, right? It's clear to everyone. Everybody knows it. Trying to think of some other, turns of phrase that students lean on here, but really just like obvious, clear to everyone is the most common answer I think I get. And if you already know what comes afterwards, that should probably sound kind of dumb to you, right? Okay, hold on. I was saying that Locke's, if you just look at the law of nature, which is reason. Oh, is the preamble one could use to just say whatever you want. Yeah. It's the meme about, us today, like, here's my very carefully researched and sourced study, and I hope you agree, and I haven't made any mistakes. I've cited each point meticulously. And, some dude in the 18th century, here are things I thought up in the bathtub that are self-evident laws of nature because I consulted reason, right? It's like that. Yeah, I agree. But I'm also relatively optimistic about certain things that can at least be shown to be reasonable, or something that a reasonable person could believe, right? So back to the text. No, this is perfect distraction. This is actually very helpful. But the idea that something could be self-evident doesn't usually offend my students, right? That idea on its own. which is good, right? Okay, it makes sense. Like we should hope. I hope. We should hope. I hope that there are at least some things we can consider to be obvious that don't require a ton of debate. But when you read what comes next, you should already have some things in your head that make you go, huh? Right? So he says, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. Now, I mean, if we're good Americans and we've studied the Declaration and recited our pledge and we have our good civic education and everything else, of course we believe all men are created equal, right? But I mean, what's the most obvious thing you can imagine? I used to teach at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and if you imagine a stereotypical Wisconsin-Madison student, what's the thing that they're going to bring up at this point? Whoa, hold on. Didn't they have slaves? And of course, yes, they did, and that's the next week of the class. I actually look at the question of slavery in colonial America through some historians that I can talk about. I probably won't have time tonight. I'm going to crash at about 2 hours, but it's a good point, I think, right? Because if you say, well, it's self-evident that all men are created equal, you know that a good number of the men who signed this document owned other people. That means they thought there were certain types of people who were capable of being owned in a legal sense. And so it doesn't seem self-evident or obvious to everyone that all men are created equal. In fact, if you go just a little bit forward in American history, you get I'm not going to oh my goodness. If you get to the crisis period in the decades leading up to the Civil War, you have people arguing, and I'm getting Calhoun and Clay mixed up in my head. I'm pretty sure it's Calhoun, but somebody can correct me. But you have at least one person who in legislative debate says, like, effectively, the Declaration of Independence is wrong here. This was a mistake to say that all men are created equal, because they're not. And so it doesn't seem, if your definition of self-evident is obvious, it doesn't seem obvious or apparent on its face to everyone who signs this document that all men are created equal. They keep this line, right? This is a line of legal and moral and political principle, but they do remove the grievance later on about slavery specifically. And it's difficult for me to parse at times, like sort of the different views of the men who signed this document, given that. But what I like to, going back to the geometric point you made earlier, Ian, the way I like to explain what I think self-evident means here, or at least in Jefferson's imagination, is this. The best example I can think of is the Meno paradox in Plato's Meno. And so this is a dialogue where Socrates is at his friend Meno's house, and they're talking about knowledge. And Meno and Socrates back and forth on this paradox that they're developing, which is, if you lack knowledge, how do you ever gain knowledge? If you don't know what you don't know, how do you know to go look for it and find new information? It can happen by accident and all these things. They run through all of these options, and Socrates bats them all down. But this is where Socrates develops his idea of, in Greek, it's anamnesis, or unforgetting or remembering of a doctrine of knowledge. But how he demonstrates it is what I think I want to latch onto as this idea of self-evidence. He pulls Meno's slave into the conversation. So Meno has a slave boy, and in the course of the conversation we learned this isn't an educated slave, right? The Greeks had slaves that were more, manual labor kind of slaves. They had slaves they kept to educate their sons. This isn't an educated slave. Anamnesis, yes. So the slave boy is uneducated, but Socrates is like, well, here, let me walk you through a geometric principle. And he draws a square on the ground, and I forget in the dialogue if it's 1 by 1 or 2 by 2, but I usually just draw up on the board a 2 by 2 square. And I ask my students, like, I know we're at a liberal arts school, but what is the area of a 2 by 2 square? And they say it's 4. And I say, how did you figure that out? And explain, base times height or whatever principle they know. But I say, okay, so in the dialogue, Socrates walks the slave boy through the intuition of finding the area of something. Right? If something's, a 1 by 1 square, he says, well, how much area is contained within it in those units? It's 1. Okay, what about 2? And then he's like, well, 2, and then he's like, no, think about it. It's this much one way, and then this much on top of it. And he's like, oh, it must be twice that, so it must be 4. And he, gets him to figure out how to solve for area. And then he does this really tricky thing, which is he's like, okay, do you think you could figure out how to draw a square with twice the area of that 2 by 2 square? And the slave, of course, at first says, well, just double the length of the side. And then I walk through my students. I'm like, okay, so now I draw a 4 by 4 square. What's the area, etc. Anyways, I'm not going to go through the whole thing. He eventually gets the slave boy through the course of the conversation to realize, without being told, that if he draws a square with the base of the diagonal of the 2 by 2 square, he can draw a square that is twice the area of the original square. And Socrates uses this to demonstrate that the slave boy really had the knowledge of geometry the whole time. He just had to unforget it. He had to be guided through it. He couldn't be taught it even. You couldn't just tell him, well, here's how you double the area of a square. No, he had to come to understand it himself, and to solve the paradox, the only way he can do this is through unforgetting or remembering. And I think, maybe I should look for better scholarly support for this, but I think that's what Jefferson means by self-evident. I think he means that it's something like a geometric principle, like doubling the size of a square once you understand the relationships between the sides and the area of a square, that it would become obvious if it were sort of shown to you. But obviously not everyone believes it. Not all governments in the world believe it at this time. Not all people in the world have believed it at all times. Not all people signing on to the Declaration believe it in the same sense, at the very least. So it's a tough thing to wrestle with, and I want them to wrestle with it, because it is tempting. I'm thinking here of my friends. I want to talk to Ryan Mullally over at his Natural Law channel about this at some point. Ryan's a self-professed deist, who subscribes to a view of American principles that is largely this. But this concept of self-evidence in the frame that Jefferson is developing it, and the way that I think Ryan understands it, it's interesting, but it's at least contestable. So I think it'd be fun to talk about. Okay, but these are the truths that we hold to be self-evident. That all men are created equal, tough proposition for some people at this time. That they're endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. And then I stop again and I ask my students, what do you think that means? Unalienable. Can you give me a definition? What does it mean in this context? And of course, he means these are rights that you cannot give away. And so he lists among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So that liberty point, right, is important. Locke has a whole section on slavery. And what makes Locke slightly different from Hobbes, for example, is that Hobbes, here's a scholarly source in the ancient text. Divination classes, unforgetting the future. Hey, there you go. There's my scholarly source. You've thrown me off. So the chapter on slavery, Locke says you cannot ever consent to actually being enslaved, because slavery, properly defined, is the absolute power of one person over another, even over their body, to dispose of them how they want, up to and including killing them. You can't consent to that. It's a different sort of power than political power, and he says no, it's not, literally not possible. You always retain a right to resist that kind. If somebody tries to enslave you or express that authority over you, then you can resist. So that's that liberty point there. But Jefferson very famously took this tripartite maxim that Locke has of life, liberty, and property, and makes it life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He does that because even by Jefferson's time, that term property had become laden with the idea of literal parcels of land, and that's what a lot of people think Locke means, and they misunderstand Locke quite badly when they do, because Locke says your property includes your life and your liberty. Your property is originally in your body and what flows out of it, that what you put your time into, the labor that you mix into other objects. So everything flows out of your property. So property is the big bucket that Locke puts everything into. I think quite wisely Jefferson removed that distracting word, pursuit of happiness, as more enigmatic, but it's more fun. All right. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. Whoa, stop. I ask them, what are the at least two claims being made there? Right. And so we have, again, a kind of justificatory clause. Right. Here's the reason that governments are instituted among men. They are instituted among men to secure these rights. Okay, so pretty basic claim. The only reason we institute governments, and this is an exclusive statement. He doesn't use the explicit universal language, but it's an explicit statement or an exclusive statement that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. Governments are instituted among men, not for any other reason, but to secure these rights, you could almost say. Or at least primarily for the reason of securing these rights, if you don't want to make it logically exclusive. Like maybe he didn't mean there's no other possible reason we could come up with, but at the very least, this is the justification for it. But you also have this other claim that's really important, again, in the context of absolutism, in the context of the divine right of kings that's just, kicking around in the background of history here. Governments are instituted among men. They didn't grow up from the ground. They weren't plopped down here by God directly. We make them, which means we can unmake them. Because, next clause, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. And then I pause them again, which is, by this point, they may still be laughing. They may be annoyed. It depends on the class. I've had some that really find this a fun exercise. I find some that by this point are kind of just like rolling their eyes. They're like, are we really going to spend this much time on this small bit of text? And I say, yes, that's all I do with my life. That's what it means to be a political theorist. So what does it mean for the government to derive their just powers from the consent of the governed? And I walk them back through some of that social contract intuition. And I ask them about this concept of consent, right? Because most of the time in this class, at least, we haven't read Locke. And so they may not have these working ideas of tacit and explicit, or express rather, not explicit. And I just want to, I poke and I prod, because I remember having a fun conversation with my libertarian or maybe anarchist leaning cousin. I don't know what he was at this point, but about this concept of the social contract. And he's like, well, where's the contract? I didn't sign it. Like, when did I give my consent to be governed? You can't take my money. Taxation is theft, right? That kind of thing, right? And so working through this idea of the consent of the governed in the context of the documents we've read before comes a little bit easier, right? Because we've seen laid out on the table people explicitly arguing about what it means to be represented, for your consent to be given, both for the person who's going to be making, there you go. Yes, once you draw it out, you're like, oh, duh, because when I draw it diagonally, here's here's half the area, and then if I take half the area and then quadruple it, I've doubled it. Oh, of course. It just clicks. You're like, oh, why didn't I see it sooner? Yeah, he anamnesis to you again. I don't know what the verb form of that is. I'm not even gonna try. I am trying to work on Greek this summer, but it's bad. It's real bad. I'm embarrassed by my own incapacity with languages. It's quite terrible. Okay. Anyway, so by this point in the class, we've gone through the representation and consent issue sufficient to where this usually isn't too tricky, but it's worth zooming in on a little bit. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it. And I stop there. I mean, we could just keep going. It's a pretty coherent thought in this sentence, but I stopped them there. That is also a pretty big claim. It's not as big as it seems at first, because the English people 100 years before this have already claimed a right to alter at least some parts of their system of government when it became destructive of these ends, and we see that in the Glorious Revolution. Now, Burke's defense of the Glorious Revolution in his Reflections on the Revolution in France is that we didn't really alter the system of government. What we did was we made the slightest possible alteration to the line of succession. Right, so when James II was becoming destructive to the ends of Protestant government, and then had a son that he baptized Catholic that gave us the possibility of a Catholic dynasty, nay, the French allying with this Catholic to overthrow our Protestant kingdom, we went ahead and, with our power of consent, just took James out of the line of succession, or James' son out of the line of succession, and put his daughter there instead, along with her husband, and very strongly encouraged him to abdicate. So we didn't really alter our form of government. We just sort of made a little nudge. That's sort of, I mean, Burke's, a little bit more, he's more reasonable than that. I love Burke. Jefferson is making a slightly more radical claim than that, but it's not unusual. Revolt is kind of the basic check on power in a monarchy. Yeah, exactly. And the question always for monarchs historically has been, how do we avoid this? And that's why I opened the class with the, hang on, I don't like this one. You guys get to see my bearded beats. There we go. I gotta be careful with my I should keep my displayed window popped out so I don't accidentally, but there's nothing in my Spotify I don't want people to see. I see we listen to Cars a lot. It's for my kid. We listen to Brian Fallon a lot. Here we've got my DRM free bearded beats from Bearded Blevins. Shout out my boy. Okay. Oh my gosh, what was I? Yes. So when I talk about the Lycurgan reforms in the first class, this is one of the things that I hammer home is when Lycurgus returns to Sparta and institutes his reforms, supposedly contestable history. One of the things he's looking for is, how do we stop this constant cycle of absolutist monarch and democratic revolt and absolutist monarch and democratic revolt? How do we keep a ballast in this system, in this ship of state? And it's the Spartan Senate and everything else that goes along with it. Okay. So it's the right of the people to alter or to abolish it. Woo, pretty hefty claim. And to institute new government, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Now, I like to highlight this sentence too, because it's almost perfunctory, but it is really important for everything that follows in this class, because the next unit of the course is this unit that I call the State Constitutions Debated. So from 1776 until the Constitutional Convention, we are having arguments about what our state government should look like. Should we have one house of the legislature or two? Should we let everybody vote or just a few people vote? Should the executive be one governor, or should it be a body of governors or a sort of executive cabinet? Or, how are we going to do this? And then, obviously, with the Constitutional Convention, we have a severe disagreement about how our national government should be organized. But at that point, I remind students that if you accept the principles of the Declaration, you are accepting that those things are sort of prudential political matters, not, at least most of the time, properly speaking, in principle matters. Because what Jefferson says here is that when your form of government is no longer doing the thing you set it up to do, you have the right to alter it or abolish it, and then reinstitute some sort of government in whatever way you think is most likely to affect your safety and happiness. This is why Jefferson is not the sort of like libertarian dream that some people make him out to be. He is somebody who believes in a limited government, that certain forms of government would be actually tyrannical and sort of inherently destructive of these ends. But there are things that the government can do with its political power that range quite broadly, and that's up to the people. And so we can have a plurality of state governments that look quite different from one another. We can have an Articles of Confederation and then decide, no, actually we need a constitution. We can make modifications to that constitution, because all of this is part of the legitimate process of instituting a government that to us seems most likely to affect their safety and happiness. And here, I love this claim that Jefferson makes. He says, prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. So, two claims, or at least two. One, prudence tells us, don't go willy-nilly changing the wheels of power and government. Don't go tinkering too much, because it's a big deal when you want to alter your system of government. You shouldn't do it for light and transient circumstances. It should be something undertaken seriously with the kind of weight that this document kind of gives it. And he says, experience proves that that's kind of how it works. One of the reasons Jefferson includes this is one of the primary lines of attack by the Tories in the colonies, by skeptics of the Declaration, by people who would prefer to wait around a couple of years and see what happens with this whole British Army thing, is that if we accept the legitimacy of revolution now, we are accepting the legitimacy of revolution later. If we give a thumbs up to violent resistance now, there will be interminable violent resistance later. This, by the way, is one of the reasons why things like Shays' Rebellion are so terrifying for some people. It's like, oh no, all the predictions are coming true. It's just going to be perpetual revolt for on and forever. And Jefferson says, come on, guys. Experience shows us that people in history actually put up with a lot of crap. They will suffer a lot of wrongs, a lot of injustices. They are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. They will put up with a whole lot before they get to the point of picking up guns. And so that's, I think, an important thing for Jefferson, right? It's because, again, I remind students we're in this part of the document that I think is more practical than in principle. The preamble and the very beginning of this section give us the political theory, but now we're sort of into the sort of like practical considerations. Like, you might say in response to this, hey, aren't we just going to be revolting left and right forever? No, actually, that's not how it works. It's not how people work psychologically. I don't know if Jefferson's really right about that, all things considered, or at least I think he might be underestimating the sort of disruptive effect of one thing leading to another. But he is right that historically people have put up with a lot. Adams might respond in his dissertation on canon and feudal law, like one of the reasons they put up with a lot was because they had these tyrannical systems of law impressing on their brains. But now that they're freed from that, maybe it will just be perpetual revolt. Who knows? Okay. So he says, look, okay, actually, let me back up a step again and say, so he's made these claims. Look, no, this won't just lead to perpetual revolution. Actually, history proves people will put up with a lot. But this also serves for him to tee up his sort of, actually, the term tee up is a golf term, right? But every time I hear it, I think of like tee up like T-ball. And so I was just about to mix metaphors, which I shouldn't do, but I'm going to anyways, right? He's teeing himself up for his home run. That's a terrible, terrible mixing. I'm sorry. But which is the only reason we would be doing this now is if these things had become insufferable. It's a self-justification, right, on the basis of historical evidence. And so this gets to the sort of rhetorical flourish that gets us to the long train of abuses. So didn't Jefferson want us in the French Revolution just because? No, he thought they had similar justifications that we did. He was very much a Francophile. He spent a lot of time in France, was very friendly with them, found it well suited to his tastes in various senses. Franklin as well really loved hanging out with the French. So I don't know if it was just because. I think he thought they had similar justifications to what we did, similar grievances against their monarchy. And so he and Paine are two of the most radical among the founding set in this sense, although I don't really consider Paine a founder, but that's a fight I'll have also with Ryan Mullally at some point. Okay. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states, To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. What a great phrase. I mean, one thing, you can be as skeptical of the American experiment as you want. You can have all your gripes with Jefferson and the deists and whatever, but man, there's some fun writing here, right? There's some stuff that's just like, there's some just great rhetorical flourish. Just love it. It's a lot of fun. Okay, hold on. By the way, I'm not just doing this because I think you guys need to learn about the Declaration. I'm writing this essay that I have to submit in like a week. I'm like a third of the way into it, but most of it is just going to be doing this. And so this is me writing an essay in my head. So you guys are helping me write, which is great. Okay, so let's look at some of these abuses. We don't really have time to get through all of them because I am probably going to hop off at 2 hours. It's about 12 minutes. My voice is dying. I'm doing this twice, 2 nights in a row. It's been a long time since I've done this. He says he has refused his assent to laws the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. Right. So back to his summary view, he has not signed into law the laws that would have been good for the colonies. He's forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained. So there was a period of time during that period of what Burke called salutary neglect, when laws passed by the colonial legislatures were allowed to be passed by the legislature, ratified by the royal governor, and then put into effect while they waited to hear back from the king, who would just give his perfunctory signature, say, check, you're ready to go. If I see the word geometric in your article, I'm demanding $1. Okay, I'll Venmo you. You can request it. Are you sure it shouldn't be $1.12? Just, I don't know. I think if you factor in the tip and tax, and I might owe you, there might be a little bit. Sorry. Anyway, there was a period of time where effectively laws could be put into effect while waiting for the express approval of the crown on the basis of the governor's signature. This is on pause at this point in the lead up to the revolution. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. He's called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. He's dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness. Manly firmness. His invasions on rights of the people. He has refused for a long time after such dissolutions to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsion within. I'm going to jump to judiciary powers. This one's important. He's made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries. So after the acts punishing Massachusetts, in the course of establishing these new laws for the collection of revenue through taxation, the admiralty courts are established, and the judges in both of these cases that are established are dependent on the crown for their salary and for the continuation of their office. They serve at the pleasure of the king. That's why in our Constitution we establish an independent judiciary. He is kept among us in times of peace, standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. This is one of the chief complaints throughout this whole period from the 1760s onwards. Having a standing army is a threat of force constantly, and they don't like it. He is combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, that is, parliamentary jurisdiction, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation, for quartering large bodies of troops, armed troops among us, for protecting them by a mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states. I give the students some anecdotes from Morgan and some other history texts, right? Because of the Quartering Act and because of the Intolerable Acts, basically what would happen was you were required by law to put up troops in your home if you had the resources, give them food and shelter and whatever. And as I mentioned last time, these troops are not always the nicest guys. And the acts that are put in place in this period, both the Quartering Act and then the Intolerable Acts, have a layer of protection where these are military officers. They're tried in military courts or in English courts. And so if someone was accused of something like murder or other crimes, they might end up being put on trial back in the home country. And if you wanted to testify against them, well, you might have to make the trip. And so I asked them to consider things that did happen, actually almost to the letter like this. You are forced to put up troops in your home. One of those troops does something awful to your daughter or kills your son. And then you accuse him of a crime, and then he gets shipped off overseas and gets away with it. How are you going to feel about that, right? This is one of the things that's sort of pressing on them at this point. For cutting off our trade with all parts of the world. No comment. Imposing taxes on us without our consent. For depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury. For transporting us beyond the seas to be tried for pretended offenses. Same thing, like somebody in the colonies could be accused of a crime and then carted off away from home and family to be tried overseas. Abolishing the system for English laws in a neighboring province. I believe this is Canada. I need to double check on that. So I'm going to skip down. These are all very important, but I want to conclude with the concluding paragraphs, which are amazing. So in every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be a ruler of a free people. Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We've warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We've reminded them of the circumstances of our immigration and settlement here. We've appealed to their native justice and magnanimity. And we've conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They, too, have been deaf to the voice of justice and of consanguinity. Right? So we were of one blood. And this is, by the way, I don't want to harp on this point too much, but obviously it's a contested thing right now, what sort of ethnic or political makeup the United States should be, what sort of immigration policies we should have, etc. And sometimes people will grab onto founding era documents and talk about the way they spoke of nations and peoples and races and try to port our current conversations back into them. Remember that Jefferson is talking here of consanguinity in the sense of the peoples of America are subject to the British crown, and so they are of the same blood, of the same people with the English. That includes, for Jefferson, many, many people who are not of English descent. Okay, so you should be hesitant of over-reading into words like these in the founding era. Contemporary debates or any particular view of like white Anglo-Saxon stock or anything like that, it's really not actually what's in the background. Shipping people overseas for trial sounds familiar. Yeah, that's we've done that a couple of times, haven't we? Okay. We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation. And again, think of these paired, right? They've been deaf to the voice of justice and of consanguinity, and so we're going to separate now. And I think the implication is we are no longer properly consanguine. We are no longer the same people. We are no longer brothers in the same way. The consanguinity here is not one of actual blood or race or descent. I don't think. That's my I'm not a historian, but based on what anyways, I can rant about that next time because I have a bunch of writings on slavery we'll go through. We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation and hold them as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war and in peace, friends. And this, I love this concluding salvo. Okay. Justice Clarence Thomas recently spoke at the University of Texas, Austin, and honed in on the concluding paragraph of the Declaration, right? We like to focus on the opening paragraph. We like to talk about all men are created equal, etc., etc. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Isn't that amazing? But this last paragraph, man, it just hits hard, right? So we, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do in the name and by authority of the good people of these colonies solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that, as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Oh, it just hits so hard. It's great. And so you can scroll down and see some of the names here. Some very famous, some less famous as the years have gone on. George Wythe, Thomas Jefferson, Morris, Rush, Franklin, all the representatives from Pennsylvania are quite prominent in their own right. Wilson, I'll talk about at some point. Wilson is my favorite founder, though he died in some disgrace. He was a kind of founding era crypto bro. He obtained much debt in land speculation and contracted, I think, pneumonia in debtor's prison while serving as a Supreme Court justice. Man, if you guys think the Supreme Court is controversial and scandal-ridden now, Wilson, man, wild guy. But he's great. His lectures on law are really powerful. Bartlett, Adams. So you will find here, lots of South Carolina names kicking around there. Lynch and Middleton, and then the South Carolina delegates at the Constitutional Convention as well. Everything's named after them down there. You do have A. Payne here. I cannot remember if I'm going to Google this real fast. Let me do it in a different window. No, I'm not a robot. Why are you making me do this? It's the same network Okay, yeah. So Robert Treat Paine is not related to the Thomas Paine of fame. The beer inventor signed the Declaration. Yes, he did. Sam Adams was the more radical of the Adams cousins. Sam is a cousin of John Adams. Sam is, I think, properly speaking, a domestic terrorist and controversial for a lot of reasons. Much more feisty than his cousin John. But yeah, Robert Treat Paine, not closely related to Thomas Paine. You'll notice that Thomas Paine is not a signer of the Declaration. Thomas Paine is also not a signer of the Constitution. He didn't matter. So I will fight with people about him being a founder. It's a sore spot for me. I mean, he inspired a lot of people towards revolution. He I think arguably more than any single writer pushed sentiment in that direction. Other than that, he died alone and no one liked him. So okay, let's see. Was there anything else I was going to say about that? Actually, yes. No, I'm not done. Hold on. If you guys will indulge me for a second. I have one more thing. Whomst among us. Among us. If you'll indulge me for 1 second, there's a letter that I want to read you. It is a letter on the occasion of, or in the lead up to, the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. If you don't know this, it sounds fake, okay? But my favorite historical fact that probably you guys know this. It's not obscure or anything. So Thomas Jefferson was good friends with John Adams for a time. Well, good friends. They were always tense, but they were they were friendly for a time. Okay, so Adams serving under Washington as VP, Jefferson, contentious elections drove them apart. Okay, they basically were the heads of political parties and movements that moved in opposite directions in the wake of George Washington stepping down as president, and they spent many decades estranged from one another. Late in life, as they are both old men reflecting on the revolution in their own lives, they strike up a correspondence again. So we have the Jefferson and Adams letters from the 18 teens and 20s that are just beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And both Jefferson and Adams die on the same day. And that day was July 4th, 1826. Two of the founders most directly involved in the drafting of the Declaration of Independence, two of the founders most directly involved in the early days of the Revolution, who had developed this like adoring correspondence for multiple decades, both died on the same day. And Adams' last words were, "Jefferson survives," but Jefferson had died hours before him and he didn't know. It's wild. Like, if you wrote that for a show, people would think you were lying. It's one of those historical facts. It's just like, somebody made that up, right? But by all accounts, it's true. So, mere weeks before Jefferson would pass, Jefferson is invited to speak at an event commemorating the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. And by Robert Chew Waitman. What a great middle name. Robert Chew. Chew. Chew, chew. And so his response is, remember, 50 years removed from the Declaration. It's old man Jefferson having developed many of his thoughts in the meantime, right? So take it with a grain of salt. It's always weird to take later writings and back interpret them into earlier writings, all that kind of stuff, right? But it's a great letter. Jefferson says, "The kind invitation I receive from you on the part of the citizens of the city of Washington to be present with them at their celebration of the 50th anniversary of American independence, as one of the surviving signers of an instrument pregnant with our own and the fate of the world, is most flattering to myself." And then this abridges some of the things that he says about it, which is really annoying, actually. Why are you abridging it, actually? It's annoying. It's not that long of a letter. Whatever. This is the point. The conclusion is, "May it be to the world what I believe it will be to some parts sooner, to others later, but finally to all. The signal of arousing men to burst the chains under which monkish ignorance and superstition had persuaded them to bind themselves, and to assume the blessings and security of self-government. That form which we have substituted restores the free right to the unbounded exercise of reason and freedom of opinion. All eyes are opened, or opening, to the rights of man. The general spread of the light of science has already laid open to every view the palpable truth that the mass of mankind has not been born with saddles on their backs, nor a favored few booted and spurred, ready to ride them legitimately by the grace of God. These are the grounds of hope for others. For ourselves, let the annual return of this day forever refresh our recollections of these rights and an undiminished devotion to them." So you can see a couple of things. I say I really like it. There are things about Jefferson I very much disagree with. You can see some of the fire that comes to him late in life, especially about what he calls monkish ignorance and superstition. Adams had a similar kind of bent to him that we saw in the dissertation on canon and feudal law. They both have this intuition that dogmatic religious movements have constrained the mind of man historically. And he, at this point, 50 years removed from it, sees the Declaration as this light to the world. Pretty self-aggrandizing, right? Who else called themselves that or said that you should be a light in the world? Whatever. This light to the world to sort of illumine the darkened corners of the mind that have until now been dimmed or chained by monkish ignorance and superstition. And he says that what he values most here is the free right to the unbounded exercise of reason and freedom of opinion. He and Adams write back and forth on this quite a lot about reason, freedom of reason, freedom of opinion, and especially religious liberty. And there's I'll show a letter next time I do this. It won't be for a few days at least, but there's a letter people like to grab onto where Adams is talking about Christian principles, and they like to use this, especially those stupid stupid monks, dude. Yeah, that's the thing. Like, Jefferson is like the Reddit atheist of the crew for sure. Completely ignorant in many ways of what the debt that he owes to the monkish superstition he's decrying. But Jefferson and Adams both write back and forth on religious liberty, and there's this letter where Adams talks about what he takes to be Christian principles of the founding. And this, I think, has deceived many people because pseudo historians like David Barton like to grab onto this and say, see, Adams was a good Christian man. He believed that America was founded on the Christian principles. And if you go and read the rest of the letter, he says, what are those Christian principles? Well, they're the principles that are most clearly taught by Voltaire and Rousseau and others. That is, he says, what he calls the absolute freedom of religion. And so I think, you're free to disagree with Adams. So, like, you're free to disagree with Jefferson. I do on lots of things. Just don't, in what I take to be a kind of hypocritical way, pick them up as sort of like icons of a cause that they very much were not a part of. So I like studying these people because they're so fun. They have such interesting ideas. They're wrong in interesting ways, and they're right in interesting ways. That's how I would summarize it. So I wanted to make sure I hit that. I do love that language, though, of the spread of this light is laid open to every view, the palpable truth that the mass of mankind has not been born with saddles on their backs, right? This idea that there isn't this born difference between one person that puts them higher up in the hierarchy, deserving of something special. No, this is the equality of the Declaration on display. There are not a favored few booted and spurred riding us by the grace of God. No, we're equal in the eyes of God and man. And on Jefferson's account, it's a fun phrasing of it at the very least. Okay, 1 second. Where's my mouse? There's my mouse. Okay. I am gonna, I think, head off probably. This was fun. That we picked up a few viewers early on. Got a couple people pop in who hadn't been here before. Good to see you guys. I don't know when the next time will be that I can do this. These are basically only going to happen on nights when my wife is working. Oh, wait. Okay, no, there we go. Okay, I thought I had my mic muted on this scene. I don't. Yeah, so these are probably only going to happen on nights when my wife is working. And they'll probably be about a couple hours. I want to work through fleshing out this PDF and then go through, like, I'm also in the next couple, I'm going to go through specifically a lot of the Federalist Papers. I want to, again, have some sort of record of some of my own thoughts on this. Not even primarily as like content creation, because I don't expect this to pop off or anything, but because I want to have a record to go back to of my own thoughts. Like I said earlier, with the Declaration stuff, I'm sort of writing an essay in my head and my words, and I can go back and reference that. But yeah, I appreciate you guys stopping by. Good to see you, Riddle. Good to see you, Ian. And then we had a couple of people earlier. Trombone King, love it so much. And Silly Guy 6969. What a great name. Loved it. Love to have it. And Ethan, our new mod. I should make I haven't made any of you guys the like big type of moderator. I've just made you standard moderator, but I should make Ethan the one head honcho, the one big guy. Let's read the Federalist with the speed with which they were written. Well, Hamilton did write fast, as the musical will tell you. All right, it's been real. It's been actual. Tiffany was forced to watch it. Amazing. Well, I appreciate it. Hi, Tiffany. Hope you're doing well. Hope the kids are treating you well. I'm going to go probably get in bed. Maybe read a little bit. Yeah, another reason this is nice is because my evenings, I've tried to write in the evenings when I have a desperate need to write. There's a lot of things I need to be writing. But once I have the kids in bed, my writing brain is like, it's non-existent. But this I can do. The ranting I can do. So I can force myself to skim through these documents, talk through them, rant a little bit, and it wakes up some brain cells. And that to me is, I think, the most productive thing I can do with these little snippets of time. Better than League of Legends. That's what I'll say. Better than League of Legends. So hopefully very soon too, the background will be improved. There will be a period where I won't be able to do anything, but eventually I will be in a new wonderful office, a beautiful office, the most beautiful. They're saying only $1 billion, only $1 billion. It'll be awesome. And so that will be fun. I am so excited to actually get to make my study the way I want it to be. Living in a rental, I didn't want to bolt things to the walls or paint anything or whatever. So looking forward to improving that. Okay. Thank you guys for stopping by. I hope you all have a wonderful evening, and I'll be back someday. Water is better for your health than crack cocaine. I learned that from Charlie Sheen.